Good afternoon, students and faculty members. We are back again for the second part of Claude Arpi's discussion. We had the first part on Wednesday, and this is the second part which Claude is going to address and complete his presentation, after which it will be opened to question and answers again. For those who could not attend the first part of the session, may I just take the liberty of briefly introducing Claude to you once again. Not that he actually requires any introduction. He is such a well-known author, a Tibetologist, a researcher. I would only encourage students to go to Claude's blog, read his articles. They are very insightful articles full of fresh information, new information, original information, and of course to read some of the, in fact, not some, all the books that Claude has authored, Claude, as you can see, is not an Indian. He is an overseas citizen of India, but he likes to be called an Indian. He was born in France, and he is actually a dental surgeon. He came to India in he's been here in India for the last 48 years. And just to run through some of the publications which Claude has meticulously brought out, the first one is The Fate of Tibet, which was brought out by Haranand Publications in 1999. Then he brought out the Panchshil Agreement and Glimpses of Tibetan History, and the more recent ones were the Negotiations That Never Were, Dharamsala in Beijing, and 1962, the
The Magma Online
Saga, which was brought out in 2012. And Claude was also, he held the Chair of Excellence, the Karyappa Chair of Excellence in the USI Institute. And Claude has regularly written on Tibet, China, India border and military issues, and also on the Indo-French relations on a host of platforms, right from radio.com to Economic Times, Statements, Asian Age, and so on. He writes extensively for defense publications in the USI Journal, as well as war colleges, CDS journals. He has given lectures at very reputed organizations such as IDSI, USI, CLAWS, and so on. In March 2021, he also made a presentation on India's northern boundary, history, legacy, and prospects for the Eastern Command in Kolkata in December, and on India-China boundary issues as well. So Claude's talk will be a continuation of the previous one, where he is again going to focus on the Tibet-India border. And he would be sharing his very insightful PowerPoint presentations, and at the end of which we look forward to a healthy session of question and answers. So I would request Dr. Sonam Joldan to take over and Claude to begin with the presentation. Thank you.
So that is a part 2 of my presentation. 2 days back, I stopped at independence. So now I will take on from that point on. Can you hear properly?
Yes.
So I called the British legacy. In August 15, 1947, the British left the subcontinent, but they left with leaving a lot of problem to India. And one of the problems was, of course, the northern border facing Tibet as well as Xinjiang. So now the British were very good strategists. And just before leaving, after the end of the World War II in 1946, 1 year before they left, they made a plan. The General Staff in London made a plan what would happen if Tibet is invaded by China or by Russia. At that time, they thought that maybe Russia would invade Tibet. So they put on the same level Soviet Union and China. So they drew a line. So if the Soviet or the Chinese cross that line, and at that time it was nationalist China, it was not Mao Zedong, we would military interfere, but we want the support and the goodwill of the Tibetan, where the British were ready to interfere, but with the condition that the Tibetan would help them. So that remained in the file. But I had a good luck to find that file. But it's an interesting because we'll see that in 1950, when the Chinese walk in Tibet, it was no question for the government of India to intervene militarily. Now, another part of the legacy, which is quite interesting, which is not very well known, but which had a very serious consequence for India. All the map of the Survey of India, the British had set up an office in 19th century in Dehradun, and they had started to map the entire subcontinent. Nowhere they marked the border. They mark the contour, like the ranges. On that map, you see the Aksashin and you see the Kunlun range, but you don't see any border. Though in 1864, Johnson had drew a line, including the Aksashin. But as a result of this British legacy of not marking the border, India, from 1947 to 1954, published and printed on its own map boundary undefined. And this would have incalculable consequences because China would start claiming all this area, arguing that you don't know where is your border. You write on your own map, border undefined. And it's only in 1954 that Nehru realized that mistake and published what is today, still today, the political map of India, showing the map as it is today, including Aksashin as well as Gilgit-Baltistan. In 2019, after the abrogation of Article 370 of the Constitution, India published a new map, but it's exactly the same border that 1954, but at that time in 2019, Ladakh had become a UT as well, and J&K had become a UT. That was the only difference. And the UT of Ladakh include Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, something happened at the time of independence. The British showed that to have divided the subcontinent was a good thing for them, but they should definitely ally with the Pakistan. And as a matter of fact, the chief of staff, you have to realize that in August 47 till 1848, for 1 year, all the commander-in-chief, O'Kilneck in India, Grasset in Pakistan, were British. And they decided that to offer Gilgit-Baltistan to Pakistan. And one Major Brown, who was commanding the Ladakh Scouts at that time, took over Gilgit and gave it away, while legally, according to the resolution of the UN, the 1947 and the August 48 resolution, Gilgit-Baltistan was part of the Indian territory. Still today, India claimed this territory on its map, but still it is in a possession of Pakistan. So it's changed tremendously for the border, because most of the issue which took place after would have not taken place if that border had been, if the Gilgit-Baltistan had come back to J&K state. Now, same thing happened for the Siachen Glacier and the Saltoro Ridge. In 1949, commission bipartite between Pakistan and India met in Karachi, and they decided that the end of the border was that point 9842, because it was too difficult to survey beyond. So they said, and north to the glaciers, it will be not demarcated. As a result, in 1984, Pakistan started claiming, and India moved very fast and occupied the entire Salto ridge. Until still today, this entire area has been under India's control, though logistically it's a very difficult. But again, that resolution of the UN of August 13 of 1948 says that all the territory of G&K belong to India. But if the Pakistani withdrew from the place that they have occupied in Gilgit-Baltistan, as well in the so-called Azad Kashmir, I mean Mirpur and Muzaffarabad, there will be the possibility, if both parties agree, of having a plebiscite and decide for the future of this area. But it was very clear that the two issues were separated. First, all the entire area, Gilgit-Baltistan and Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, are part of the territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And later on, they could be, after withdrawal of the Pakistani, something they never did. So now, someone asked, day before yesterday, what is a turning point? I think the main turning point is the annexion of eastern Pakistan and the occupation of Tibet. And it went very fast. You know that on October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the People's Republic of China from the rostrum in Tiananmen Square. And he moved extremely fast. A couple of weeks after, he moved 6th Army and the 2nd Army to annex eastern Pakistan, eastern Turkestan, which at that time was under the control of the Soviet. And for some reason that I've never been able to find out, and I don't think anybody has found out exactly, Stalin agreed to Mao Zedong occupying the entire eastern Turkestan, which became the Xinjiang. But it would have tremendous consequences for India. On the November 30th, for example, the People Liberation Army reached Shaibullah at the edge of the Aksachin, and they occupied Kashgar, Khotan, Keria, all these places. And it's quite a remarkable military operation which has not been described very often. But in 2 months' time, they occupied all their entire territory, and an area which had never been Chinese, which was directly under the control of Soviet Union, became part of the People's Republic of China. Now, what are the reason? I said I don't know, but I think there was some sort of a deal between Stalin and Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong at that time, in December 49, January 1950, was in Moscow. He stayed for two, 3 months in Moscow, and I think there was some deal that Mongolia, Outer Mongolia, would remain under the Soviet, and the Chinese could occupy temporarily eastern Turkestan. At that time, the Soviet had so many experts and people posted that they thought that they would do, Mao Zedong would do the dirty work, and once they will take over the control. But it opened the gate to northern India, to Ladakh, to Aksachin, and as well as to western Tibet, Rotok, and Gartok. Without this military operation, Mao Zedong would have not been able to take the entire western Tibet. Now, 1 year later, Mao Zedong invaded Tibet. He crossed the Yangtze on October 7, 1950, and from 3 directions, he moved towards Chamdo. In about 12 days' time, Chamdo fell, and it was the capital of the Kham province, and it became part of the People's Republic of China. And it's mainly the 18th Army, which came from from Sichuan, from Yan'an and Ganse, who occupy Chamdo. The governor of Chamdo, of Kham, Nabe Nawang Jingme, surrendered without fighting. There was no fight, and there was about 3,000 or 4,000 Tibetan soldiers. They fought, but they were not at all equipped and trained to fight a war against the People's Liberation Army. For Mao Zedong, it was the first phase. He wanted to do a military operation in eastern Tibet, and the second operation would be a diplomatic one, and it resulted in 17 points agreement, which was forced on the Tibetan in May 51 in Beijing, and even the seals of the Tibetan government would be forged, and it resulted in the control of the entire Tibetan plateau. Now, what is interesting is your side, the Ladakh side and the Nari side, the Western Tibet. On August 1st of 1950, 126 cavalrymen only, 136 cavalrymen invaded and took over. So it just shows how weak was the Tibetan state. There was no fight. There was nobody to defend the entire Nari, which is a huge landmass, and to come at the gate of Ladakh. So 136, and in the recent years, they have put a big museum in Nari, and they have done a lot of films showing that the heroes of Western Tibet who took control over Western Tibet. The two governors of Nari, the Garpen, just surrender without any fight and start serving and helping the Chinese troops. Later on, more troops came, but by that time, by October 1950, they were surrounding the Aksashin and Ladakh. Now, in the early 50s, the border issue emerged, but in the meantime, for a few years, the situation continues as it was in Lhasa. Lhasa had a full-fledged mission up to 1952. Later on, it had a consulate general in Lhasa, India had. And there were, for 3 years, Mr. Richardson, the former British head of the mission, became the Indian head of the mission because India had nobody who had the knowledge of Tibet like Mr. Richardson had. Later on, Mr. Shumul Sinha, who is at the bottom here, from the Foreign Service, replaced him. And he was an extremely brilliant diplomat. He kept warning the Nehru government and the Ministry of External Affairs that China is going to invade, and that would be a huge change for the borders of India, but nobody really listened to him. In Gangtok, there was a political officer, also an extremely brilliant Indian civil service, ICS officer, Harishwar Dayal. And his wife is the only lady who played in Wimbledon in the 50s. Actually, it's a very interesting story. And when the Chinese came to Lhasa, the Dalai Lama had to leave Lhasa and take refuge in the Chumbi Valley. He was given a guard of honor by the Maratha Light Infantry, which is called the escort, the military escort, which was posted, the Indian military escort, which was posted in Tibet. So at that time, India, the military escort, had 3 trade agencies and a full-fledged mission. Now, the other big change after the first change of 1950, the second big change is the Panchshir Agreement in 1954, because for the first time, India admitted that Tibet was part of China, and the title of the Panchshir Agreement, it is known by the name of Panchshir because preamble was inserted in the agreement, but the agreement it's mainly for the trade as well as the pilgrimage in Tibet, and that agreement, for the first time, India, the government of India, recognized Tibet as part of Tibet. In the title, The agreement is between the Republic of India and the Tibet region of the People's Republic of China. So that was the end, legal end of Tibet, at least as far as India is concerned. But interestingly, that cartoon of Shankar shows the violation of the Indian territory, the transgression, thousands of transgressions would take place between 1954. The first one was in Baravati in the central sector till 1962. So that was the end of an independent nation, Tibet, and that was the beginning of the problem for northern India and for the border. Now, something very interesting I could find in the Nehru papers, in the Nehru Memorial, all the Nehru papers related, all the transcript of all the telegrams, cables, and report during the negotiation for the Panchil. And the Chinese, from the day first, it lasted 5 months, the negotiation, were adamant to mention Demchok. And the Indian negotiator couldn't understand. And at the end, in April, just a few days before they finally signed, the Indian ambassador, Mr. Raghavan, got very, very upset with the Chinese. They shouted at each other, "Why you don't want to put Demchok? What is the problem?" They said, Chinese said Demchok, the entire Ladakh is a disputed area, and that's the reason. While they put 6 passes like Niti La or Manala or other passes in Uttarakhand, they refused to put anything about the border between Tachigang and Demchok. And later on, a few years later, they would claim the entire territory along the Indus between the Kailash range and the Ladakh range up to Dungti. And still today, they are claiming this area. Though in the 1942 treaty, Schulz Treaty, I mentioned it 2 days back, that the boundary were very clear that Demchok, the Nala, was the border. You see, the Chinese started building that road in 1952-53. And in 1957, it was inaugurated. Now, usually the government of India said that they have not noticed the road. And but in fact, when Captain Rajendranath, he became Major General later, claimed he witnessed the starting of the road in 52. I said that royal battle during the negotiation for Panchil in 54. In 55, there was Lakshman Singh Jangpangi, one officer originally from Uttarakhand. He was posted as an Indian trade agent in Gartok, and he discovered that China was building the road, and he was told by the Chinese they were building the road. But the government, especially Krishna Menon, who became the RM, the defense minister in 57, always refused to acknowledge. In 55, when Britisher Sidney Wignall was sent by the military intelligence, and he discovered the same thing. He confirmed that the road was being built. Again, it was ignored. In 57, when Colonel Basera from the 1st Battalion of the Kumaon Regiment went and he saw the road, and he came back and reported in Delhi that he saw the road. And when they went to Krishna Menon, he was told that he must be a Chinese, American agent trying to spoil the friendship with China. So it was rejected time and again. And in 1958, you got that new slide? A note was given by the Foreign Secretary, Subhamal Dat, to the Chinese ambassador. It says it has come to the government of India notice that the road had been constructed by China across the eastern part of Ladakh region of the J&K, which is part of India, the completion of which was announced in September 57. So 1 year after the completion, of the road. Once the road was in service for 1 year, the government started protested, and they said it is a matter of surprise and regrets that the Chinese government should have constructed the road through indisputably Indian territory without first obtaining the permission of the government of India and without even informing the government of India. So it was so weak, that protest, that China got the green light to go on with that road. And today it is very doubtful that if they ever return that road, because that road is so important for them to link their two newly acquired province of Xinjiang and Tibet. It was the easiest road. It was across the desert, and there's not many passes, and it was easier to. But the years after 56, 57, life continue, at least for the monasteries. In 1960, there was about 400 Ladakhi monks in different monasteries, and Kushok Bakula went to Tibet in 57. He went to each of these monasteries. He met the Chinese representative at that time, and at that time nobody foresaw that there would be the uprising of 59 and subsequently the revolt of the Tibetan all over Tibet. So something interesting, actually, if you look at the Indian Consul General in Lhasa, Mr. P.N. Cole, most of his work was on the Ladakhi monks, because China said that these monks are Chinese. So the Indian consul would say, no, they are part of GNK, they are part of Ladakh. And it took nearly 1 year for releasing these monks and letting them come back to Ladakh. And Kushok Bakula, of course, was very instrumental in pushing once he had gone back to GNK. And at that time, also, Taksang Rempa, the head Lama of Emis, was studying in Tibet. And it's very unfortunate that Tule is still in Lhasa. I think the Ladakhi have tried to get him back. He came once or twice, but today he's in Ladakh, and I think China is not planning to let him go. So just to say that despite the road, despite the tension which was starting brewing in Tibet, the revolt in eastern Tibet in calm, life went on for a few years, and there was a heavy Ladakhi presence, but also Bhutanese and also Nepali presence in Lhasa. So it's only in 1960 that China, for the first time, and actually the only time, published a map of their claim all along the border, which is including even Gilgit-Baltistan to the tri-junction with Afghanistan, to the Wakhan corridor here. So Chinese policy has been, that is my interpretation, but you can agree or disagree, but as I see it, first help yourself. You take the Ashashin, and after they say we are ready for the negotiation. They start saying in 58, 59, we are ready for negotiation. The first clash, they took some Indian officers from the sappers, Iyengar. When Captain Iyengar, they made him prisoner. They kept him several months in China, and finally returned. I mentioned the first clash near the Pangong Tso in Spangok Tso, soon after the Dalai Lama had crossed, and other places also the border started. All these clashes, except the 58, when they caught the Iyengar, are linked with the Dalai Lama's taking refuge and India welcoming His Holiness in India. Another feature of the Chinese policy is they changed the post. I will show later one map of 1956, a map of 1959, and the map after the war of 62. you see that claim, the Chinese claim, have changed. And again, in May 2020, they try to change in 5 places. Another feature is to change the name of the place. Like here, you have Parigas, which is Demchok, but I don't think any Tibetan or Ladakhi have heard of Parigas. So that goes from Dongti to Demchok. All this place they've start claiming. And basically they do what their strategic interest dictates. And unfortunately, India has never followed this principle, though it's changing. But as a result, they start grabbing more and more land. And maybe they thought that in May 2020, they could again do it few kilometers in there to get a better strategic position. This time it did not really work. One of the issues, there's never been any agreed border between Tibet and Ladakh, or Tibet and Jammu and Kashmir, or between China and India. I mentioned 2 days back the convention between the Great Britain and the Manchu of 1890. It was repudiated by Tibet because Tibet was not part of it. Similarly, for the trade regulation in 1893. When Youngest Band invaded Tibet in 1904, there was a convention. It was repudiated by China. In 1906, there was a convention between the Great Britain and China again. It was repudiated by Tibet. Only the agreement of 1908 was agreed by the 3 parties. And of course, 1914, I mentioned the Shimla conference and the McMahon line. China never accepted that line. And it was not ratified by China. In 1951, India was not informed about the 17 points agreement, though there's a clause, an article of the Shimla Convention saying that if any issue pertaining to Tibet should be jointly discussed by China, India, and Tibet. So it was not respected. And in the case of the Panchshir Agreement that I just mentioned, it's quite shameful. But Tibet was never informed about it. And I've read all the exchange of in the discussion between the Consul General in Lhasa and the PO in Gantok and the ministry. They've never informed Tibet that they were negotiating on their back. The government of India was negotiating with China on the back. So the big change was the Dalai Lama when he came to India. So in 1956, because His Holiness Dalai Lama, His Holiness Panchen Lama were for the 2,500 years of Buddha, they came and spent a couple of months in India. Chu Enlai came. He was very nervous about the presence of the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama in India. He came and there was a map. He showed a map which is representing the Chinese claim. And that map is far east compared to today's claim, or where the clash took place in Galvan or Hot Spring or Depsang. So we have that map of Chu Enlai, and we have the letter from Chu Enlai to Nehru of December 17, 1959. As a matter of fact, the Chinese map published in 1956, to which Your Excellency Nehru refer, correctly show the traditional boundary between the 2 countries of this sector. So, but today they're saying that during the talks on the lake, on Chushul and Moldo, they always say that in November, means 1 month earlier, they had given another line which was much more advantageous for them. I'm not sure if India has really pointed to that discrepancy. And they also, that letter, they always refer. What is sad that China has a position. Now their official position, they have given a letter in November 7 of 1959. they say that they defined the LAC and they have given a map. Now, in the map, which is with the Ministry of External Affairs, there is no map attached. So it means they have not given the map. But now they have rewritten this history. And what is the sad part of it is the entire Indian press is keep repeating that, mentioning the November 7 map, which doesn't exist. So it's very difficult unless we have to really study more in India, and particularly in your university, more the history to show, to call off the bluff of China. All the territory which today China claims has been proved to be part under Ladakh. So we have to keep calling that bluff, and I really wish all the many students would go in these issues and will try to find the documents and show that China is bluffing. But today they can bluff without being caught. And it's only actually, they speak about that September 59 map, but it's only in 62 that Zhou Enlai gave in a letter to the Asian and African leaders in December 62, means the war was over, the ceasefire had been declared, and he gave this map, which is today their claim. But interestingly, you see three of these points, Galvan, Gogra, and the figures. The map is so vague, is so poorly defined that you cannot really draw LAC. Because LAC is a line of actual control, is to which point each army is controlling its own territory. On this, it's absolutely impossible. So it resulted by the May 2020 attack in 5 places, but 3 of these places, it's so vague, the map, that it's very easy to advance 1 or 2 kilometers when LAC, which was not existing in 1959, that is the only map given in 1962 by China. India and China had talks several times for several years. The first one was for the central sector in Baravati, in Chamoli. It was inconclusive. Not only inconclusive, but each time China went back on its promise. China agreed, and India agreed that this small area called Baravati, north of Niti village, could be patrolled, but with unarmed soldiers. And the first year after the talks in 59 and in 60, China sent armed patrols. So that is a long story of agreement between China and India. The agreement is signed, but later on not followed. And there were talks in 1960, I mentioned it 2 days back, and talks in 61 between Indian ambassador in Beijing, G. Parthasarathi, and the director of the ministry in Beijing. It never found any conclusion, and it ended by a border war because, again, China tried to advance the border at that time. In 1960, for the first time, Zhou Enlai mentioned of LAC, a line of actual control. And it was the first time India had never heard about this thing. They were thinking in terms of IB, international border. But line of actual control is different. You have a certain claim, like India claims the entire Aksashin, but it has no control over the Aksashin. So for the first time, Zhou Enlai introduced this, and he said we should restrict ourselves to the LAC, where the administrative jurisdiction. But as you know, in Ladakh, there's not such a thing of administrative jurisdiction except the grazing right, as I mentioned 2 days back. And while India was stuck on the watershed principle, Zhou Enlai said he spoke of watershed, rivers, valley, mountain paths should be equally applicable. So that is the main difference. For example, for the central sector, India is very clear about the watershed. In Sikkim, India is very clear. But China said, no, there's not we have to take into account other principles that I mentioned on the first thing. And many agreements were signed, all mentioning the LAC, but the LAC, no map of the LAC was attached to this. You see, if you pass a law in the parliament, or you first define what is this law about, what is it for. So if you mention one term, you define the term. In all these agreements of 93, 96, 2005, 2012, 2013, the LAC is mentioned, but at no point in time a map is attached to this agreement. That was a blunder, I think, that Indian diplomacy did. And once I asked an ambassador why you sign an agreement and you don't define what you're signing about. And he said, sorry, I told the prime minister that we should put a map. And the prime minister said, I have to present it in a parliament. Let it be passed. Let the parliament agree, and we will discuss with China about the LAC, define the LAC, and produce a map. It was never done. And at one point, beginning of 2000, India and China tried again to find a solution to their border dispute. A map were exchanged from the central sector, and it's only map that we have today. In June 2002, the western sector was seen, means Ladakh, was seen by 20 minutes. Each party during the negotiation brought their own claim of the LAC on the map, on the table, and both parties, so there was so much discrepancy between the two that they withdrew the map, and since then no map has been exchanged. So there's no official map of the LAC. And in the in the west, that is the northern sector, but in eastern sector they have never been exchanged, and that's the tragedy, and that is a root cause of the 2020 confrontation, because no map of the LAC existed. Though China is pretending that in September 59 they have not given, but there's no map of the. Now, what can India do? I think India should promote Buddhism and other faiths while developing this border area. I'm saying other faiths because many areas Guru Nanak has visited, like in northern Sikkim, in Guru Dongmar, or like some places also in Tawang area, north of Tawang. So this place should be developed. The government of India has started. They've done this vibrant village scheme, and many villages have been adopted and developed for tourism. But also culturally, India should renovate the Gompa, support, though India is a lay state, it's a secular state by its constitution. It cannot support or finance Gompa, but it can support and finance institutions like you have in Choklamsa, the Buddhist Institute. So this could be multiplied. Now, the big advantage that India has over China, the advantage that Ladakh has over the Rohtak and the Nari, is that religion and Buddhism is a really strong force, which is acknowledged. This picture, when His Holiness, it was last year, when he arrived in Leh Airport till his residence, there was 10-15 kilometers of people waiting to get his blessing. And on the other side, 2-3 years ago, the Panchen Lama recognized by China, I went, there was maximum 20-30 people. I collected all the photo of the Chinese Panchen Lama's visit to Demchok and Chiakang and Rohtak, and there was 20-30 people maximum waiting to receive him. And so that's a big advantage that India has. And days like the July 6th should be celebrated since few years it's celebrated in Indus Valley near Dungti or Koyul, and China is not happy, is putting banners on the other side, but let them put banners. I think they would like very much the people, the Tibetan from the other side, to cross over and celebrate with the Ladakhi and the Tibetan refugees the July 6th. Actually, as I was telling someone jokingly, they should be invited to come, the Tibetan to come and join the Ladakhi and the Tibetan refugees for July 6th. So this type of function, as well as some festivals, has been recently organized in Ladakh on the border areas. And the opening of the border areas to foreign tourists as well as Indian tourists. I mentioned Umlingla, that fashion show, but Hanle, for example, the observatory, and this should be developed more and more. And first, because this is all Indians' territory and is something that China cannot do the other side. So I mentioned reopen traditional pilgrim on the border, but also trade. 4 or 5 years ago, there was a talk of reopening Domchule. And actually, it's interesting because it's each time it's the Chinese who back out. India, government of India was ready, the Ladakh Hill Council was ready, and details were worked out how to reopen Domchule officially, not for smuggling, because smuggling was a big issue but for proper trade, like in Natula. It never happened. Promote the Boti language I remember that 13, 14 years ago, I attended Kalachakra in Kaza, in Spiti Valley, and there was a big conference about promoting Boti language and introducing it in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Still has not. I don't know why the government is sleeping on such a things. I think agreement could be found between all the parties and introduce the Boti language as in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, and promote history of the Himalaya. I mean, like your university, I'm sure it will do it. It must have already started, but I was quite shocked once I went to Shimla to the Institute of Advanced Studies, and I say, how many PhD you have in Himalayan studies? How many students are? They say none. I said, why? Shimla should have been the center of this. And now there's also in Sikkim, in Gantok, you have a good Institute of Tibetology. In Arunachal, in Tanga Valley, you have also good, on the same line that the Choklamsar Institute of Himalayan Studies, but it should be developed further, and I think your university has a role to play. And I had written this Chinese pilgrims to visit Gaya and other Buddhist sites. I've written it last year, but now I'm not too sure. And yesterday, the Chinese government refused to give a proper visa to people, sportsmen from Arunachal Pradesh. They have done it also to the Ladakhi. So as a matter of fact, the government of India has withdrawn the entire delegation in these games in Chengdu, in Sichuan. So it takes time. And like the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, the Takshin Yatra in Arunachal could one day be reopened. But to go to Kailash, the most logical way, the easiest way would be to drive from Leh to Denchok of Donchule and to cross and to go to, it would be one day drive to go to Kailash Mansarovar. So I hope this will take place in the future. Of course, the situation is tense because of the Ladakh. And the Tibet card, I think what changed many things, and when a Tibetan officer from the establishment 22 from the Special Frontier Force was killed on the Kailash range near Rezangla. in August of 2020. Suddenly, everyone in India realized that the Tibetans are fighting for India, and so this should be used also as a card and help the Tibetan refugee more in Ladakh. And have the teaching of His Holiness, I think, is the most important event, which also it doesn't please China, but that's important because it's a root of the culture and the civilization of the Ladakh area, as well as Sikkim or Arunachal. I mean, at least Tawang and some other place like Siang. So that Tibet card was also important. That operation of the Tibetan troops were also important because for the first time India took some territory, occupied some territory, which was a bargain. So some say they should have not given so easily that range, which was so strategic. It was dominating the entire road between the Spangor Gap and Rutok, and all the supplies and comes on that road. So India decided to return it in exchange of a deal on the fingers. I don't know if it was a good deal or not, but there's another issue. So now you have already seen it's mainly due to the fact that there was no map of the LAC, and many of the places were not officially claimed. So actually, it's interesting that the confrontation 3 years ago has resulted in defining the LAC in many places. Unfortunately, not in Nepsang and Demchok, but in other places through the 17 rounds of talks. Maps have been exchanged, and now the Indian Army and the Chinese Army know exactly where they stand and where they can up to which point to patrol. So it's bringing some stability. Unfortunately, China is not going to give easily Depsang and Demchok for the good reason that it would be a loss of face for Xi Jinping. One general called Zhao Zhongxi, he was the commander of the Western Theater Command. He knew very well the area. He had been commanding the Tibet military district, and he decided to advance the LAC in these 5 places, thinking that India would not react. Unfortunately for him and for Xi Jinping, India had reacted and brought reinforcement and stood by the LAC. It was a bit late, and at least for Depsang, and now many places India is not able to patrol in Depsang, but the reaction of the government of India, which was more prepared, because for example with the Ladakh scouts or the Tibetan, it's easier for the acclimatization and to bring troops. The first 2 years, the PLA, the Chinese had a lot of problem of oxygen, of acclimatization, and the Chinese army is an army which go by recruitment. There's 2 recruitment every year, so they are new. In India, it's more a professional army. And even if you have madrasis or bihari, like there was in Galwan, these people have been acclimatized, have followed the process, and which was not the case of the Chinese. So I think the Indian Army has an advantage on the Chinese Army, but as I mentioned 2 days back, for the infrastructure, for the roads, it's much easier on the Chinese side. And also, the Chinese army has much more gadgets, though sometimes they are bluffing. Like at the time of Galvan, they said that they had drones to deliver the food, and they were delivering fresh food, fresh vegetable to the troops. And I think it's nonsense. They stopped talking about it and showing videos of drones dropping. They had exoskeleton, something that you put on your leg and make you run in the mountain and things like that. A lot of bluff from the Chinese side, and but unfortunately, this confrontation is not going to end very soon, because it would mean that Xi Jinping, Zhao Zhongxi, the general, is retired, but Xi Jinping would have to admit that in the first place he occupied Demsang, this area, and Demchok. One solution, at least for Demchok, would be they had something called agreed disputed area, one area which is neutralized, and where patrol, armed or unarmed, could patrol this area at different time or jointly. It has happened for example, in Arunachal, in the place called the Fishtail. The Chinese and the Indian troops are patrolling the same area at different time. They inform each other that we are going to patrol like that. So that's one solution, but I think it's quite far away. Mr. Wang Yi, the new reappointed Minister of External Affairs, Foreign Affairs of China, has met the NSA, Mr. Ajit Doval, last week. They say they will meet for one more time, 18 times on the lake, but I doubt that these two issues of the song and the thing. So, but at the end of the day, when you look at this map, when you look at the history of these areas, all these places were Ladakhi. They were not Chinese. So I think it's your job to really go into it deeper and show that it is to find the records, the land records, the grazing records, the records of the travelers who visited this place, and show that this place had nothing to do with China. So I think that's an important job. And I mentioned already this 18 rounds of talk has been the first exercise to partially delineate the LAC in East Ladakh. It will take much more time, but it's very interesting to note that it's Indian Army who negotiate for the first time. Of course, sometimes there's a representative of the Ministry of External Affairs from Delhi who comes, but usually, I mean, not usually, it's always the corps commander of the Indian Army who negotiate with his counterpart in China. And sometimes the army is more practical. I would say even the Chinese, both are, because China, of course, has this compulsion, this political compulsion, and they have their the political commissar who is always with the army commander. But at the end, they are quite practical, and they don't want to clash again like Galwan. So Galwan was provoked by the Chinese because it was Xi Jinping's birthday that day on 15 June of 2020, and one local officer wanted to please his emperor, and he started that clash. But ultimately, it resulted for 20 casualties on India's side, but probably 45 on the Chinese side. So they don't want to reiterate that. So I think both army will ultimately find a solution. Army is the last one who wants war because they are in the first rank when it happens. And I end up by a prayer that tomorrow the world will be more peaceful, and this beautiful Himalaya should come back to the peace it had for centuries and millennia. That was the most beautiful and most powerful peace in the world, these Himalayan mountains. So unfortunately, it has been because of human wanting to grab land. And I must say that it's Chinese is not a very good neighbor. When the Tibetan were a neighbor, it was easier to find a solution or to keep talking about it. So I hope that for a better tomorrow, but in the meantime, both armies are facing each other. Thank you.
Now we have some questions We have one
The
question
first
from the
one, no,
last.
last time, no? Last
Yes,
time there was
yes. So, yes, yes. The last time, one question left, which was, what are your view on China facing possibly two-front war and significance of TAR 14 5-year plan? I think Tibetan Autonomous Region 14
it's two
5-year
different
plan.
questions, very different question. About the two-front war, you see, for decades after 4950, India thought that Pakistan was enemy number one. And of course, there was Indochina Hibai in the 50s, and I mean, it resulted in a war in 62. But still, India never took very seriously the Chinese threat. It's only very recently, I must say, it's after Doklam in June 2017 that India realized. Prime Minister had gone to Wuhan. Later, after in 2018, Xi Jinping came to Mabalipuram, and everyone thought all issues could be sorted out. And India, as a result, was not really prepared in May of 2020. And for 1 week, India didn't realize that, especially in Depsang, that China was occupying some of Indian territory. So now it has changed. There's very clearly two front. India has to be prepared for two front. And we have seen that, I don't know if you have read in newspaper, that the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Anil Chauhan, has been working, and before him, General Bipin Rawat had been working on theaterization. Means you have two theater command. Instead of having in Ladakh, for example, you have 14 Corps, which is the army. You have the IAF, the Indian Air Force. We have separate command and separate everything, separate procurement, separate. Now, the government of India has decided to have theater command. In the theater command, the head of the command, the commander, will be either from Army or Air Force, and will have an entire theater opposite. Theater means one front. It's the same thing than the front. So I think end of August it will be announced that there'll be 3 new commands. One command for Pakistan. It will be based in Jaipur. One theater command based in Lucknow for China. It will look after the entire Chinese border, and the third one maritime for the Navy. So by rotation, Air Force officer and Army officer will be commander of this. So it shows that government knows that there's two fronts. They have taken the decision to face these two fronts. And of course, there's always the possibility of if Pakistan attacked, China sided with Pakistan. But at the same time, the lessons of the Ladakh confrontation is that it won't be easy for the People's Liberation Army to grab few more kilometers of the Indian territory. They've tried in December 2022 in Chomiyangtse, in near Tawang, east of Bumla, and at night they tried to capture some Indian territory. They were sent back the next morning. So they know that it will be much more difficult to take India by surprise, and it will be much more difficult. But these two fronts are here to stay, and the government has taken measure or is going to take measure to face two fronts. So this is called the theater command. Regarding the significance of the Tibetan Autonomous Region 14 5-year plan, many infrastructure is an important part of it. I mentioned it already 2 days back. The new airports, 3 new airports. One is in Purang in Nari, which is near the Kailash. this is important, as I say, because of the dual use of this airport. A lot of new helipads, and eventually the train will reach Kirong, the border with Nepal, and continue via the Aksachin to Xinjiang. So the road that they did in the 50s, between 52 and 57, across the Aksachin, they will be in parallel railway lines. That's not for the 14, but is for 15 plan, 15 and 16 plan. And the train will also reach Chumbi Valley, 15 plan, and Sona, 16 plan. But 14 plan, something is very worrying for India, is the plan of surveying the Yalong Sampo, the grid band of the Yalong Sampo, to do some hydropower plant, which would be 3 times the size of the Three Gorges Dam. I'm not sure at all. Many authors and journalists have been writing recently that China is going to do it. I'm not sure at all they are going to do it, but they will certainly do the survey. That survey is mentioned in the 14 5-year plan. So it's a very difficult terrain. It's a lot of landslide, mudslides, and earthquake, the 1950 earthquake. So that's not easy. They won't do it so easily. And so let's see. But that's, I think, what the most important thing to watch from India is that survey. Of course, they will not tell immediately the answer of the result of the survey, but that is.
There is another question from Rigzin Nurbu. He says, could you please share some points on Tikmosgan Treaty? Some more points on Tikmosgan Treaty.
I mentioned after the Mongol-Tibetan War, there was a treaty, and what remains, I think Franke, you must have all this book in PDF of Franke about the history of Ladakh. He goes into detail, but I think the important point I mentioned about the Nala is the border in Demchok, and each time there used to be a meeting between Gapin, the governor of Western Tibet, and the British resident, and the Wazirat Wazarat of Ladakh, and people from Srinagar. It used to be in Demchok. So that was really the there's a lot of many books have been written, and I don't know if this treaty still exists in Timor. I don't. What something interesting I've been thinking is, after last talk, that you should find where are the archives of the Wazir al-Wazarat. So I was told in Srinagar or maybe in Jammu, but I'm not too sure. But certainly not in the DC's office or like that. But there would be a lot of records. I'm also told that in Emis Kompa, the Chancellor is keeping records, land records of many of this area, which they show clearly that this area, the monastery, or were collecting taxes, or the house tax, or grazing, or the agreement between different villages, or villages, the sarpanch of different villages, an agreement is saying the copy is kept. If that is very important to find for the history of Ladakh, and to show that where's the Chinese in that? There's no Chinese. No? It's between sometimes the Tibetan Gapan, otherwise between the Ladakhi villages.
So next question is about the nature of PLA army in Tibet. How many Tibetans are in the Chinese army?
You see, the origin of this, the fact that the PLA started recruiting Tibetan, has been the operation of the Tutus of the Special Frontier Force on the Ladakh range in August 2020. Suddenly, they realized that the Tibetans are fighting for India. They have 70 years ago, they have invaded Tibet, they have occupied Tibet, they're controlling Tibet, but Tibetan people are fighting against them. So they were psychologically, I think it really shook the Chinese army, and they started a big campaign, but it was more a publicity campaign that we are going to recruit. Now, they can recruit for militia or different jobs, but not for special force. Or the special force are the most trusted because they do special operation, and you can't afford to have someone who will go the other side, or if Dharamsala or His Holiness says something, he will immediately retire. So I don't think they've ever planned to have a special force in line with the establishment 22. How many? I think a few hundred, 700. I had read some article in Chinese. They included 120, 130 women, but mainly for the militia, to do supporting work for the PLA in terms, for example, of surveying of Reiki. You send them to, because they know especially north of Arunachal Pradesh, all these new village, Shokang village, they use Tibetan who know the area. Similarly, India will use local people who know the area to show the way for the patrols and things like that. So that's not really the army. That is more paramilitary forces, and so it's not big. And more recently, last 1 year or so, I hardly see anything in their Chinese newspaper and thing about the. It comes more in India that there were some news reports saying that there's a lot of Tibetans on the border, but it's much more in the militia than really in the PLA. The PLA has this border defense regiment, so very rarely they have Tibetan, except for translating and like that. There was an interesting incident in the eastern sector, I think north of Tawang. There was some confrontation between the Chinese army and the Indian army, and both had the Tibetans in their troops. So from the Chinese side, they told the Tibetan, "You are traitors. You're a Chinese. How can you be serving India? You fight against your own country, China. If we catch you, we will take you to Lhasa and we'll hang you publicly in Lhasa." It means that they are upset. Chinese are upset. They have asked this guy to speak, but Chinese are upset by the fact that Special Frontier Force have been fighting for India.
Okay, there is another question by Tempa Dagal. PRC and the Communist Party has always shown tendency to not stand by its own words, even when it comes to bilateral or multilateral treaties. Your presentation highlights it very clearly. Hence, in such a context, why are governments still trying to appease China with the trade booming and continuing to grow each year between the two countries?
That is absolutely true. That from I mentioned from Baravati first negotiation till more recently, they've always the government of India has always tried to appease China. You remember that in 2018, the government, the Ministry of External Affairs, published a note. It sent that note to all the state governments and to all the officials, including the army, that nobody should meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama and nobody should meet the Sikyong in Dharamsala, or they should not be invited to Delhi because China will be upset. So that mindset has continued since the 50s till more recently. I think there was a change after Doklam, first change, and the second change came with COVID. Everyone knows from where the COVID has come. It has come from that lab in Wuhan, and China has given that to the world. So the way that the world is looking at China and the way India is looking at China has tremendously changed since 2020. And the last war was the confrontation in Ladakh, which was absolutely uncalled for. If they had a doubt on the LAC, how much territory they tried to grab in Galwan? 1 or 2 kilometers, just to be in a position to dominate the new road which is going to DBO. So all these things could have been discussed. But usually what China does, what they have done in Aksachin, what they are doing in the South China Sea, they take whatever they need and they said we'll negotiate after. But negotiation never anything happened. I think the government appeasement is not booming and the trade is not booming. Trade is booming because it's more difficult to control the big companies, but progressively include the Western trade, everyone start realizing that business in China maybe it's not such a good investment. But as long as it was an investment and that company could make money, they find something, one component cheaper in China, they will get from China, the big companies. So progressively, they will then start understanding that it's not like that. But it's true that trade has been increasing. I think it's progressively it will stop.
There is another question. China claims historical Tibet and Tibet claims Ladakh. Hence, China stake claims on Ladakh.
It is a contemporary issue, but it has its root in a historical background. That's what I try to show. I didn't show the very, very old background, but it is absolutely contemporary because army on both sides are facing each other. But the claim of China is not serious if you go into detail what they did in 1960 of the Chinese claim. Whether they're Parigas, they're Demchok, or anywhere, the fact that they have changed the line 3 or 4 times, the 56 line, the 59 line, the 6, means that they didn't even know in 56 when Xuanlai came that where was their claim line. And if they had not occupied Eastern Turkestan in 49, they would have never come to Ladakh. So the problem of most of the Tibetan side means Demchok, Ranakla, all this side is more documented because of the Garpen in Western Tibet at some records, but there's much less records on the Depsang and Galwan, Hot Spring, Gogra, and all. There's much less historical record. I think they're existing, but we have to find them. So I don't know if Tibet claims Ladakh. I mean, sometimes Ladakh has claimed Tibet also. So there was dispute. So it has moved, but there was eventually an agreement in 1842 in Chushul. But I know that Tibetan claim is culturally Ladakh. I think there's many Tibetans think like that, but I don't think it's a case of the Dalai Lama and his administration. But I know that and there was also historically dispute between the Gelug and the Drukpa Kagyu. So that's played a very important role into the history of the area. No, there's even recently, 3-4 years ago, they're saying that some of these monasteries around the Kailash, who have been traditionally Drukpa, have become Karma Kagyu and this and that, and the Gelug would like to. They speak of Gelug hegemony, but it has existed. It still maybe existed in some other way. But I think His Holiness government and His Holiness himself have been very clear what is Ladakh and what is Tibet. There's no doubt about it.
So the last question is whether China is aware on the LAC realization that Durbuk-Shaok Road is threat to Tibet and Xinjiang Highway.
I think Tibet has Xinjiang. No, 219 is 219 is east of the DBO. So sometimes the newspaper, the media, Indian media said this dispute with Tibet and Ladakh, but most of the border is not with Tibet. I wish I would have shown a map here where the Tibetan claims actually that place where the Chinese had just built a bridge across a 2-kilometer bridge across the Pangong Tso recently. That's exactly the point where Tibet ended. That Tibet has never claimed west of this point, that where the lake becomes very, very narrow like that, and China has done a bridge so that they can cross very easily and come from the back in the Shushul area from the. So that is the point. Also, Dumchule, the Demchok, they were the point touching Tibet, but not most of this is Eastern Ladakh, where confrontation takes place. It was with Eastern Turkestan or nobody nowhere. There were you see the issue. I should have mentioned that Aksashin, government of India, they don't realize for one good reason that before 1940 only the caravan were going. They were crossing Karakoram Pass going to Central Asia, Kashgar and Yakhan, and the entire Aksashin was salted water. You cannot send camels or other animals and drink in the salted waters. So, but with the advent of the motor vehicle, the engine in the 40s, suddenly it became something very easy. The easiest way to cross from Xinjiang to Tibet is across the Aksashin, while the caravan never crossed across the Aksashin. Only a few adventurers or hunters have been there. But after the 40s and China, when they occupied Eastern Turkestan in 49-50, immediately they saw that this road, the Kunlun, was very, very difficult to cross. They never crossed the Kunlun. They tried in 51, 52 to cross the Kunlun. And actually today they are working on the new road, the J216, which will be the second link between Xinjiang and Tibet. That would cross the Kunlun. But today, technologically, they are so advanced in building bridges or digging tunnels. That was not the case in the 50s. So in the 50s, because of the motor, because they wanted only trucks to go on that road, they were even getting the petrol for Tibet, for the entire Tibet, the PLA was getting its petrol from Central Asia via the Aksashin road, because it was a road it's easy to. And India took time to realize this. They were thinking in terms of old caravans going only the Karakoram. I don't know the other thing. His tomb is in near Purong. There's a sort of a stupa, and they said he has been buried there. Did he was beheaded, or most of these troops died of cold also, because they were not used. Dogra were not used to that cold. So I don't know. They said he was beheaded. Some, I think, historian like Chakapa in his history of Tibet in Tibetan, he gives detail of these things. My view are a little bit radical. I think it's not possible today to get any autonomy from China. You've seen what happened last week. The Minister of External Affairs, Foreign Affairs, disappeared. China is not a normal state. China is a dictator, is a totalitarian regime, and it's very difficult to deal with China. Further, we have seen during the 17 rounds of talks in Ladakh, it's very difficult to negotiate anything with China. And I think the Americans, they have learned themselves. It's very, very difficult, and they will not give. Another also issue is that if they would give to Tibet a degree of autonomy, they would have to give to Xinjiang and tomorrow to Inner Mongolia, or even Manchuria, but maybe not Manchuria, but certainly to Eastern. So they can't afford. Today, the regime in China and in Tibet is becoming harder and harder. You imagine all these areas like Ladakh or Arunachal or Uttarakhand have been dealing and trading and exchanging with Tibet for centuries and centuries. Now, today you can't go. Till 2016, there were some smuggling in Dumchule. Even this has stopped. So it's very difficult to deal with China. And the other issue is that I mentioned, and that was the first question also, they never respect what they sign. So tomorrow, suppose a miracle, they agree to give some autonomy to Tibet. Where is the guarantee that they will respect that autonomy? Like in 58 from Bharati, or later on, even 93, they said that they will be unarmed and this confidence building measure. This 93, 96 agreement with China, they have never respected. That's why Galwan took place. So if they would sign, Tibet is a weak state militarily. You need muscles. India could get a deal on the lake in the Finger area because they had captured, the Tibetan had captured the Ladakh range above Rezangla and near the Spangor Gap, because they had a bargain. But what bargain have the Tibetan today for asking for a degree of autonomy? I come back to something that is already told me in 1986. I said, how will Tibet get free? He says something will happen in China. We are too weak. We are a small country, 6 million of people against 1 billion. There's no chance for us. We have no army. We have our power of conviction of non-violence, but only when the day something happen inside China. And something will happen inside China because it is happening already economically. When all the big company realize that China, they can't make money. Of course, Elon Musk and all, they still go to China, or Bill Gates, but it will not last forever. And that day, maybe I'm sure there'll be a possibility for Tibet to get some sort of autonomy, but not today. It will come maybe in a couple of years or 10 years or 20 years. I don't know. Nobody knows. But today, there's no chance that the middle path of the Dalai Lama works practically. I think middle path is a very beautiful concept for the future. But for today, I'm speaking of someone who spend hours and hours every day on reading this Chinese media and everything. I don't see the possibility today. They have become harder, including the PLA.
Claude, thank you very much for making a wonderful presentation yet again. I think there were some very insightful questions from both faculty and students. And we look forward to having more of such talks with Claude. I think the information that he brings onto the table is really original and, a fresh perspective as well. So thank you, Claude, once again. Thank you, Dr. Sonam Joldan, and thank you, students and faculty members, for joining us here today. The fault lines is actually a playlist of our channel under which we have talks slated with the University of Ladakh. So please do find all these talks that we've had with your university in the past on our YouTube channel under the playlist, The Fault Lines. So thank you very much.